At my brother's wedding, Dad laughed into the mic. He's not married, not educated, but at least he's good for a check. The crowd roared. I stood up, took the mic, and said, "You know what? You're right. I'm not family. I'm just your wallet." Then I turned to the bride and added, "Oh, and that $50,000 wedding gift? Forget it." You could hear a fork drop. And that was just the beginning. I, 34M, never thought I'd be the villain at my own brother's wedding, but here we are. Let me back up. I'm the older son, the one who dropped out of college after 2 semesters to help Dad when his construction business was drowning in debt. I was 19, working 18-hour days, learning the trade from the ground up while my younger brother finished high school, then went off to university on my dime. Not that anyone ever acknowledged that part. Dad always introduced him as my son, the engineer, and me as my son who works with his hands. Like there was something shameful about keeping the family business alive. My brother got married last month. Big wedding, 300 guests, open bar, the works. I'd been funding it quietly for months because Dad's business never really recovered, not fully, and my brother's entry-level engineering job wasn't cutting it. The venue deposit, the catering, the photographer, I covered it all. $50,000, give or take. I didn't mind. Family is family, right? The reception was beautiful. Everyone was drinking, laughing, having a good time. I was sitting at a table near the back with some cousins when Dad got up to give his speech. He was already tipsy, his face flushed, tie loosened. He grabbed the microphone and started the usual father of the groom routine, talking about how proud he was, how his son had grown into such a fine man. Then he pivoted. He started talking about me. Dad said something about how he had 2 sons, both so different. He said my brother had his degree, his career, his beautiful new wife, his future all mapped out. Then he paused, took a sip of his drink, and looked right at me. He said I wasn't married, wasn't educated, didn't have much going for me. But at least, he said with this big grin, at least I was good for a check. The crowd erupted. People were howling with laughter, slapping tables, wiping tears from their eyes. My brother was laughing too, his arm around his bride. My mother had this frozen smile on her face, the kind she wore when she didn't want to make a scene. I felt something snap inside me. I stood up. The room didn't notice at first, but then people started nudging each other, pointing. I walked up to the front, and Dad saw me coming. He was still grinning, thought I was going to play along, maybe make some self-deprecating joke. I took the microphone from his hand. He let me, still smiling. I told the room that Dad was absolutely right. I said I wasn't married, wasn't educated, didn't have the fancy degree or the promising career, but I was good for a check. In fact, I'd been good for a lot of checks. I said I'd been paying for this wedding, every single part of it, while everyone thought Dad was being generous. I said I'd been paying my brother's student loans for the past 3 years because Dad's business couldn't afford it. I said I'd been the one covering family emergencies, medical bills, car repairs, all of it. The room went dead silent. I turned to my brother and his bride. I told them congratulations on their marriage, and that I hoped they'd be very happy together. Then I told them the $50,000 cash gift I'd promised them, the one they'd been planning to use as a down payment on a house, was off the table. I said if I was just a wallet to this family, then they could figure out their own finances from now on. You could hear a fork drop. I handed the microphone back to Dad, who looked like he'd been slapped, and walked out. I didn't grab my coat, didn't say goodbye to anyone. I just left. My phone started blowing up before I even reached my car. Texts, calls, voicemails. I ignored all of it and drove home. The fallout was immediate. My mother called me 6 times that night, leaving messages that ranged from pleading to angry. She said I'd humiliated Dad in front of everyone, that I'd ruined my brother's special day, that I was being selfish and cruel. My brother sent me a long text saying I'd embarrassed him and his wife, that I'd made everything about me when it was supposed to be their moment. He said I was jealous of his success and couldn't handle not being the center of attention. Dad didn't contact me at all for 3 days, which was somehow worse than if he'd yelled. I didn't respond to any of them. I turned off my phone and spent the weekend alone, thinking about everything that had led to this point. The years of being taken for granted, the jokes at my expense, the assumption that I'd always be there to fix things financially while getting none of the credit or respect. I'd convinced myself it didn't bother me, that I was doing it because I loved my family. But Dad's speech had ripped off the bandage, and I couldn't pretend anymore. When I finally turned my phone back on, I had over 100 notifications. Most were from family members telling me I'd overreacted, that Dad was just joking, that I should apologize. A few cousins reached out privately to say they understood why I was upset, but that I shouldn't have done it at the wedding. Only one person, my aunt, said she was proud of me for standing up for myself. She said Dad had been taking advantage of me for years, and someone needed to call him out. The real shock came when I checked my email. My brother had sent me a formal message, written like a business letter, demanding I honor my commitment to the $50,000 gift. He said they'd already made plans based on that money, that I'd given my word, and backing out now was unethical. He threatened to take me to court if I didn't pay up. I couldn't believe what I was reading. No apology, no acknowledgement of what Dad had said, just anger that I wasn't handing over the cash. I wrote back and told him to go ahead and sue me. I said there was no contract, no written agreement, just a promise made to people who clearly didn't respect me. I told him if he wanted to take me to court over a gift, he'd have to explain to a judge why he thought he was entitled to my money in the first place. That set off another round of chaos. My mother called me crying, saying I was tearing the family apart. Dad finally broke his silence and left a voicemail saying I was being childish and needed to grow up. He said he'd made a joke, that everyone jokes at weddings, and I was too sensitive. He didn't apologize for what he'd said. He just wanted me to fall in line like I always had. I didn't. Instead, I did something I'd been thinking about for a while, but never had the guts to do. I started looking into my finances, really looking. I made a spreadsheet of every dollar I'd given to my family over the years. Loans to Dad that were never repaid, my brother's tuition and loan payments, Mom's medical bills, family vacations I'd funded, birthday gifts, emergency car repairs, groceries when money was tight. It all added up to over $200,000. $200,000. I sent the spreadsheet to my brother with a simple message. I told him if he wanted to talk about money and commitments, we could start with the 6 figures he owed me. I told him I'd never asked for a dime back because I thought we were family, but apparently family only mattered when it was convenient for him. He didn't respond. A week after the wedding, I got a call from Dad. He said we needed to talk in person. I agreed, more out of curiosity than anything else. We met at a diner halfway between our houses, neutral territory. He looked older than I remembered, tired. We sat down and ordered coffee, and for a while neither of us said anything. Finally, Dad told me he was sorry. Not for the joke, not directly, but for not realizing how much pressure he'd put on me over the years. He said he'd always thought I was fine with helping out, that I never complained, so he assumed I didn't mind. He said he was proud of me, of what I'd built, but he didn't know how to show it. He said the joke at the wedding was supposed to be funny, a way to acknowledge what I'd done, but he saw now how it came across. I asked him if he understood why I left. He said he did. I asked if he understood why I wasn't giving my brother the money. He hesitated, then said he thought I was being too harsh, that my brother didn't mean to take advantage of me. I told Dad that was the problem. None of them thought they were taking advantage of me because I'd made it too easy. I said I was done being the family ATM, that from now on if anyone needed money, they could ask like adults, and I'd decide case by case whether to help. But the days of automatic handouts were over. Dad nodded slowly. He said he understood, but that I needed to know this was hurting Mom. He said she was stuck in the middle, trying to keep everyone together, and it was tearing her apart. I felt a pang of guilt at that, but I held firm. I told Dad that Mom had stood by and watched him humiliate me in front of 300 people without saying a word. She'd called me selfish for defending myself, but never called him out for what he said. If she was hurting, maybe it was because she was finally seeing how dysfunctional this family had become. We finished our coffee in silence. Dad paid the check, and we walked out to the parking lot. Before we got in our cars, he asked me what I wanted. Not what I wanted from him, just what I wanted. I told him I wanted to be seen as more than a checkbook. I wanted my work and my sacrifices to mean something. I wanted respect, not just when they needed money, but all the time. He said he'd try to do better. I didn't believe him, but I appreciated the effort. 3 weeks went by. My brother and his wife moved into a smaller apartment than they'd planned, using their savings instead of my gift. I heard through the family grapevine that they were struggling, that the wedding had put them in debt. Part of me felt bad. Part of me didn't. They'd made their choices, and so had I. Then something unexpected happened. My brother showed up at my apartment unannounced. He looked rough, like he hadn't been sleeping. He asked if we could talk. I let him in. We sat in my living room, and for a long time he just stared at his hands. He told me he'd been thinking about what I said at the wedding. He said he'd spent the last few weeks going over everything in his head, all the ways I'd helped him over the years. He said he'd taken it for granted, assumed it was just what older brothers did. He said Dad's joke had been wrong, and he should have stood up for me instead of laughing. He said he was sorry. I asked him if he meant it, or if he was just apologizing because he needed money. He looked me in the eye and said he meant it. He said he didn't expect me to forgive him right away, and he wasn't asking for anything. He just wanted me to know that he saw what I'd done, and he was grateful. I didn't know what to say. I'd been so angry for so long that I'd convinced myself they were all irredeemable, that nothing would change. But sitting there, watching my brother struggle to find the right words, I realized maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe people could change if they wanted to. I told him I appreciated the apology. I said I wasn't ready to go back to how things were, that I needed time to figure out what our relationship looked like moving forward. He said he understood. Before he left, he handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $5,000, a small fraction of what he owed me, but something. He said it was a start, that he'd pay me back over time. I didn't know if he'd follow through, but the gesture mattered. After he left, I sat there holding the check, feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not happiness exactly, but maybe hope. Maybe this family could be fixed. Or maybe it couldn't, and I'd have to build my own life separate from them. Either way, I wasn't going back to being the guy who funded everyone else's dreams while my own were ignored. Update 1. It's been 2 months since the wedding, and things have gotten complicated in ways I didn't expect. After my brother's visit, I thought maybe we were on the path to something better. Turns out I was being naive. About a week after my brother apologized, I got a call from my mother. She said the family was planning a dinner, nothing formal, just a chance for everyone to sit down and clear the air. She swore it wasn't an ambush, that Dad and my brother both wanted to move forward. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The dinner was at my parents' house. When I arrived, I immediately knew something was off. My brother and his wife were there, along with Dad, but there were also 2 of my uncles and an aunt I rarely saw. Too many people for a casual dinner. I almost turned around and left, but Mom grabbed my arm and pulled me inside. We sat down to eat, and at first everything seemed normal. Small talk, passing dishes, the usual family dynamics. Then, right after dessert, Dad cleared his throat and said he wanted to address the elephant in the room. He said the wedding incident had caused a lot of pain for everyone, and it was time we worked through it as a family. I should have known better. Dad started by saying he understood I felt unappreciated, but that I needed to understand his perspective too. He said he'd worked his whole life to build a business, to provide for his family, and when it started failing he'd had no choice but to accept my help. He said he'd always intended to pay me back, but circumstances kept getting in the way. He said the joke at the wedding wasn't meant to hurt me, it was just his way of acknowledging what I'd done in front of everyone. He thought I'd understand the humor. I told him that there was nothing funny about being called uneducated and unmarried in front of 300 people, then reduced to nothing more than a wallet. I said if he wanted to acknowledge my help, he could have done it with genuine gratitude instead of mockery. That's when my uncle jumped in. He said I was being too sensitive, that family members give each other grief all the time and it doesn't mean anything. He said I was lucky to be in a position to help, that not everyone has money to spare, and I should be grateful I could make a difference in people's lives instead of holding it over their heads. I asked him when he'd ever helped me. When I was working 18-hour days at 19 to save Dad's business, where was he? When I was paying my brother's loans, covering medical bills, funding vacations, where was any of them? The table went quiet. My uncle didn't have an answer. My brother's wife spoke up then, and I could tell she'd been waiting for her moment. She said that while she appreciated everything I'd done, I'd had no right to humiliate her and my brother at their wedding. She said it was their day, and I'd made it about me. She said the $50,000 gift was never really about us. It was about me wanting control, wanting to be the hero. And when we didn't worship at my feet, I took it away. I stared at her. I asked if she genuinely believed that. She said she did. I asked if she'd known about the spreadsheet I'd sent my brother, the one showing $200,000 in loans and gifts that were never repaid. She said she had, and that I'd given those gifts freely. She said no one forced me to help, and bringing it up now was manipulative. That's when I lost it. I told her she had no idea what she was talking about. I said I'd spent 15 years putting everyone else first, sacrificing my own future so they could have theirs, and the one time I stood up for myself, I was called selfish. I said if she thought the wedding gift was about control, she was projecting, because I'd never asked for anything in return. I just wanted to be treated like a human being instead of an ATM. Mom started crying. She said this was exactly what she'd been afraid of, that we were tearing the family apart. She begged me to just apologize for ruining the wedding so we could all move on. I asked her why I was the one who needed to apologize. I asked why Dad hadn't apologized for humiliating me, why my brother hadn't apologized for demanding I honor a gift after calling me jealous, why his wife hadn't apologized for accusing me of manipulation. No one answered. I stood up and told them I was done. I said I'd come to dinner in good faith, hoping we could actually resolve things, but this was just another attempt to make me the bad guy so they could feel better about themselves. I told them if they wanted a relationship with me moving forward, it would be on my terms. That meant respect, real apologies, and no more assumptions that my money was theirs. I walked out. Mom followed me to the door, still crying, begging me to stay. I told her I loved her, but I couldn't keep doing this. I got in my car and drove home, and I haven't spoken to any of them since. The next few weeks were quiet. I threw myself into work, spent time with friends who actually valued me, and started going to therapy. My therapist helped me see that I'd been enabling my family's behavior for years, that I'd trained them to see me as a resource instead of a person. She said setting boundaries was healthy, even if it felt brutal. Then last week, something happened that changed everything. I got a call from my brother. He sounded panicked. He said Dad had a heart attack and was in the hospital. He said it wasn't life-threatening, but it was serious, and I needed to come. I dropped everything and drove to the hospital. When I got there, my brother was in the waiting room with Mom. She looked like she'd aged 10 years. She hugged me and said she was glad I came. We went in to see Dad together. He was in a bed, hooked up to monitors, looking frail in a way I'd never seen before. When he saw me, his eyes filled with tears. He told me he was sorry. Really sorry, not the half-hearted apology from the diner. He said lying in that hospital bed, thinking he might die, he'd realized how much time he'd wasted being proud and stubborn. He said he'd spent years resenting the fact that I'd surpassed him, that I'd succeeded where he'd failed, and instead of being proud, he'd put me down to make himself feel better. He said the joke at the wedding was cruel, and he'd known it when he said it. He'd just been too much of a coward to admit it. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to stay angry, to tell him it was too little too late. But seeing him there, vulnerable and scared, I couldn't do it. I told him I accepted his apology, but that things couldn't go back to how they were. He said he understood. Over the next few days, while Dad recovered, my brother and I talked more than we had in years. He told me he'd been thinking about everything since the wedding, and he'd come to some hard realizations. He said he'd idolized Dad growing up, seen him as this larger-than-life figure, and he'd adopted Dad's attitude toward me without even realizing it. He said he'd always felt guilty about me dropping out to help the business, but instead of acknowledging that guilt, he'd justified it by telling himself I wasn't cut out for college anyway. He said he was wrong about all of it. I told him I appreciated that, but I needed to see action, not just words. He said he'd been making the monthly payments on the $5,000 he owed me, and he planned to continue. He said he'd also started looking for a second job to pay me back faster. I told him that wasn't necessary, that I didn't need the money, I needed respect. He said I had it. We left things there. I don't know if our relationship will ever be what it could have been, but maybe it's better this way. Maybe we needed to burn it down to build something real. Update 2. It's been 4 months since Dad's heart attack, and I'm writing this because people have been asking for an update. The short version is that things are better, but not perfect, and I'm okay with that. Dad recovered fully, which the doctors said was lucky given his age and lifestyle. He's been taking better care of himself, eating healthier, exercising, cutting back on drinking. More importantly, he's been working on himself in other ways. He started going to therapy, which shocked me, because he's always been the type to dismiss that kind of thing as weakness. He told me his therapist has been helping him understand why he treated me the way he did, and he's been making a real effort to change. We meet for coffee every couple of weeks now, just the two of us. It's awkward sometimes, but it's honest. He asks me about my work, my life, my plans. He listens instead of lecturing. He stopped making jokes at my expense, and when other family members do, he shuts them down. It's strange seeing him like this, almost like meeting a different person. I don't know if it'll last, but for now it's enough. My brother has been paying me back consistently, a few $100s every month. It'll take years to pay off what he owes, and we both know he'll probably never repay it all, but the effort matters. He's also been making more of an effort to stay in touch, texting me about random things, inviting me to casual dinners. His wife has been more distant, which is fine by me. I get the sense she still thinks I overreacted, but she's polite when we see each other, and that's all I ask. The biggest surprise has been my mother. After the disastrous family dinner, she didn't speak to me for weeks. I thought she blamed me for everything, for causing drama, for upsetting Dad. But then one day she showed up at my place unannounced. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking, and she realized she'd failed me as a parent. She said she'd always known Dad was too hard on me, that he compared me to my brother in ways that weren't fair. But she'd stayed silent because she didn't want to rock the boat, didn't want to cause more problems. She said she'd convinced herself I was strong enough to handle it, that I didn't need her to defend me. But after the wedding, after seeing how much pain I'd been carrying, she realized she'd been wrong. She said she was sorry for not protecting me, for not standing up for me when it mattered. We both cried. I told her I'd felt invisible for so long, like I only mattered when there was a crisis to fix. She said she saw me now, really saw me, and she was going to do better. And she has. She calls me regularly now, not to ask for anything, just to check in. She's made an effort to include me in family events in ways that don't revolve around money or responsibilities. It's not perfect, but it's something. As for me, I've been working on building a life that isn't defined by my family. I've been dating someone for a few months now, someone who knows nothing about the wedding drama or the years of financial support. She likes me for who I am, not what I can provide. It's refreshing. I've also been investing more in my own future, putting money into retirement accounts, planning trips, buying things I want instead of things other people need. It feels selfish sometimes, but my therapist reminds me it's not. It's just balance. The family still has its issues. There are still moments when someone says something thoughtless, when old patterns resurface. But I'm better at setting boundaries now. I'm better at saying no. And surprisingly, people have started respecting that. A few weeks ago, we had a family gathering for my mother's birthday. It was small, just immediate family, and I almost didn't go. But I decided to give it a chance. When I arrived, Dad pulled me aside and asked if I'd be willing to say a few words during the toast. I hesitated, remembering the last time someone handed me a microphone at a family event. But he promised it wouldn't be like that, and I believed him. When it came time for the toast, I stood up and talked about Mom, about how she'd always been the glue holding us together, even when we made it hard. I talked about how grateful I was to have her in my life, and how proud I was of the person she was. I didn't mention the past, didn't bring up any of the drama. It was just a genuine, heartfelt tribute. When I finished, Dad stood up and added something. He said he wanted to publicly acknowledge something he should have said years ago. He said I'd sacrificed more than anyone should have to for this family, and he was grateful. He said he was proud of me, not just for the money I'd provided, but for the man I'd become. He said he'd spent too many years taking me for granted, and he was sorry. The room was silent. Then my brother stood up and echoed the sentiment. He said he owed me more than he could ever repay, and not just financially. He said I'd shown him what real strength looked like, and he was trying to be better because of it. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and sat down. Mom squeezed my hand under the table. Later, as people were leaving, several family members pulled me aside to apologize for their part in everything. My uncle, the one who'd called me too sensitive, said he'd been out of line. My brother's wife, though still cool toward me, thanked me for coming. It wasn't a perfect resolution. There are still scars, still moments of tension. But it was a start. And for the first time in years, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I had a family that saw me as more than a checkbook. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe things will backslide. Maybe there will be new conflicts. But I'm not the same person I was at that wedding. I've learned to stand up for myself, to demand respect, to walk away when necessary. And if this family can't give me that, I'll build my own. For now, though, I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm healing. They're trying. And that's more than I had 4 months ago. To everyone who's been following this story, thank you. Your support has meant more than you know. And to anyone out there dealing with something similar, remember this. You're not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. It's okay to prioritize your own well-being. It's okay to walk away. And it's okay to come back, if and when they prove they've changed. You deserve respect. Don't settle for less.